Alright, so we're going to start soldering. Alright, so this is an adjustable soldering iron. Pick your tip and whatever the manufacturer's recommendations are for how long you let it warm up and at what temperature. We've got 6040 rosin core solder. It is full of lead, and it melts at about 361 degrees. So if you have an adjustable one, set it at 370, 380, whatever. So I've got my stuff put on the template, although I'll probably end up using this little gadget, and I'll probably end up using a strong pair of glasses too, besides the magnet. And I've got all the wire I could use. That is lead-free solder. I'm not going to use that for this guy's guitar because I haven't used it yet, so I need to get used to it. Alright, so I've got a three-way switch, and this guy's guitar had a particularly unique sound, so he's got the 22 cap for the neck and a 47 for the bridge. Okay, so the first step is to ground. So you need a ground on, these are CTS pots, by the way, push pull pots. So anyway, you need a ground from this lug over to the side, and a lot of times a lot of people will use the wire on a cap. Just trim the wire from a cap, which is fine, whatever. But I have an abundance of this insulated wire right here, so this is what I'm going to use. So you solder it here, and you end up putting it on the sidewall on the same side as the lug. You solder it there. Alright, that gives you a ground. You're going to do that on both pots. Right, so I've cut a couple of chunks of wire here. And like I said, you can use the wire from a capacitor. But if you do that, put insulation around it so if nothing else touches it. Shrink tubing. And from here on out, I'm going to turn on a fan, so when I want to say something, I will just I'll type it out. In case I didn't say it before, it's easy to keep these separate because you're going to use the lug, this one here, and to keep it understandable, it's under the C1. I'm also pre-tinning these wires. Means I'm going to put solder on each end before I put it on the potentiometer. Alright, one more thing. You're not going to use the C1. You're not going to use the C1 hole right here, so you can put the wire up like this if you want to, instead of trying to get it hooked up and underneath there and stay there. Okay, so the next step, it's a little too confining to use that bulky ground wire. So what you want to do is you need to find a common ground between the push and the pull section of the switch. So what you do is you take a cap here and cut the wire to short as you can deal with. You take that piece of that wire, you run it through the back of C3, and you run it to the metal part of the potentiometer. That creates a common ground between the push and the pull. I'm just going to show you something while it's quiet here. I took these out and put them where we could see them. So, see how I soldered those at an angle like that? That's not going to work out because it'll create a short between the two posts. Once there's another wire in there, they'll probably touch. So I'm going to have to warm those up and pull the wire out a little bit. So while I've got these out of the unit here, I'll show you. I took a piece of that capacitor wire and I bent it. So what we're going to do is come in from behind. Okay, helps to keep it upside down. So we're gonna come in from behind, put the hook up, come in through the C3, which takes a little practice. Okay, there we go. Now, I'm going to wrap it around like so. Start all over again when it falls out. Okay. Now, take a piece of electrical tape, or whatever tape you have, to hold it there. Okay. You see it sticking out of C3 there. And then and we're gonna solder that to this end. We're gonna, for the bridge, we're gonna leave it sit here. For the neck pot, we will solder this one to the side. Alright, side note, when you're putting heat shrink tubing on, do not use a torch. You're talking open flame and you're probably going to end up damaging stuff. Use a hair dryer. You know, that's the easiest thing, most accessible. Put it on hot, high, whatever. It doesn't take much. Alright, so like I said, this guitar is particularly unique because it has two different size capacitors on it. And the next portion here, a lot of diagrams will tell you to solder it right to the lug on the outside here, and a lot of diagrams will tell you to put it on the top of the tone pot. And some people would argue that it makes no difference. Some people argue that you can tell the difference. If the guy, if the owner of this guitar thinks there is a difference, then I'll change the way they're going to be. But for now, I'm just going to put them right on the tone pot. This shrink tubing is actually too big for this stuff, but it's all I've got. It's the smallest stuff I have, so there's that. You know what, it's going to, I was expecting it to shrink a lot more, so I'm going to have to cut off some of this. This stuff is only designed to shrink so much, like 2-to-1 type thing. I may have to get the X-Acto knife out. Okay, lesson learned. You don't have to cut the shrink wrap to the length of the whole thing expecting it to shrink down. Especially when you already know it's too big for the wire to begin with. So what I'm doing here, we got a magnet sitting in place so that I can work with one end at a time. Once I get this end in, I won't need the magnet to hold it steady. Alright, next up we're going to solder a ground wire to each pot. We're going to cut the wire and we're going to give it some slack. Each one's going to have a little bit of slack so you can twist the potentiometers and get them to fit wherever you want, whatever. Alright. So this particular wire, I have to trim off the edges, the insulation, and you know, just like I said, give it some slack, push it in like this, whatever, and solder each end. So when you solder all four of the pots together, this is where you can solder this one into place. I'm going to pre-solder these tips. the next step is to take the neck wires, the neck pickup wires, and put the red and white wires together, twist them together. This is for a coil split. It's got to be a 4-wire pickup for a coil split. So we're going to put the red and white wires, twist them together. We're going to do the same thing with the bridge wires. So I'm going to add some shrink tubing to these wires because they don't seem very strong. Now's the time to take all the wiring out of the jig, and it has to come up here onto the guitar. Make sure to protect the guitar. Alright, so when you have it sitting like this, you got to remember everything has to move over and down, so make sure you got the wires meshed in there somehow that they're not just going to rip each other right off once you start moving it. So I'm going to do the neck pickup wires, and the wire hole is at the top or the very back of the guitar, so I have to make sure and mesh that in. So since I'm going to be in a pretty awkward position, I pre-soldered C2 and the middle lug on each volume pot. Okay, first things first, make sure and test fit your potentiometers into the cavity after you've done all these ground wires before you do any of the wiring, because I had to dig a couple more holes. I had to widen out the potentiometer holes just a bit, just to get a little wiggle room, just enough to shove them in there. So, and then this particular guitar, everything is coming over this volume pot, the neck volume pot, so that is particularly tight. So I have to make sure and not put any more wires onto this, any more grounding onto this one, because it just won't fit. Alright, and then, so, like I said, I gotta do the neck wires onto this pot. You're about to see the wiring diagram of a dependent volume wiring. That means when there's more than one volume, even if you have one full blast, if you turn the other one down, the entire guitar goes quiet. This is dependent wiring, where there's more than one volume switch. Okay, so the first thing you do, you take a ground wire and you put it from the sidewall here, C3, okay? Try to make that stick out as little as possible. Don't solder that one yet on that side. And you may need to put a shrink tubing, piece of shrink tubing in between here. Now on the second volume switch, you do the same thing, but you do solder that. And then, second step, you take a jumper cable, and a jumper wire, and you take it from lug 3 over to the sidewall and solder that. Do that on both. Do that on both of them. There's a couple different ways to do it. You can go up or over
or you can go over the side. Just depends on how much room you have in your cavity. Okay, next step. You take capacitor, you solder it onto the top of the tone switch, and take a piece of shrink tubing, go from one end over to the center lug. Next, you're going to ground the entire system together. So you take a piece of wire, solder it to that spot that I told you not to solder yet. So then you do solder those both together onto the sidewall. You solder that onto the side of the or top of the tone pot. You take another wire from one tone pot to the next, and then you take another wire from the tone pot to the volume pot. Yeah, this is how I did this one, and because I literally didn't have room to do anything else. That one is ugly. I can totally admit that. Okay, so then, and note that there's no wire from volume to volume, because they are already connected. So here to here to here, they're all connected. Okay, so then the next step, you would take the blue wire, in this case, the power wire from the bridge pickup, and you would solder it into lug 1 along with the jumper from the tone. You do that same thing with the neck blue wire coming off the pickup, solder it to the lug 1 coming off the tone, with the jumper off the tone. Then from the three-way switch, you take the red wire and put it into the center lug for the neck, and the blue wire, put it into the center lug for the bridge. And you make a ground wire for the jack, you solder that to the closest tone pot. The ground wire always goes to the lug that is touching the center post. Okay. And then the white wire from the three-way switch selector gets all the way over here. Alright, and then you take the red and white wires from the pickups, you solder those together, and if they're too big, you put them together on a jumper wire so that there's only one wire going through. You solder those into the C2 hole. For independent wiring, first of all, label the switches. So this is the bridge and it's independent, the neck and it's independent. Okay, so the only difference between dependent and independent wiring for volume, when there's more than one volume switch, is you take the tone jumper, which the tone switches stay the same no matter what. So you take the tone jumper from the first lug and you move it from the first lug over to the center lug, and that will also share the bridge wire, the power wire, whether it's blue or black or what have you. And then the wire from the selector goes here to number 1 lug, and that's all there is to it. That's the only differences. Just switch the wires around. Quite frankly, I forgot to check when I was assessing the guitar, so I don't know if it was independent volumes or not, but that's the way I'm going to leave it once I wire it that way. Alright, the jumper from the tone pot and the wire from the hot wire from the pickup are going into the center lug, and the wire from the three-way selector is in the left lug. I know the same color here, it's hard to see. And this is this one is a jumper from the white and red wires coming from the pickup. That's going into the C2. I'm just going to take a minute to melt the old stuff off of the jack. I don't want to know what that was. I'm sidetracking, and I pre-soldered a ground wire to go onto the cavity. So the best thing to do for a ground wire to the body itself is to make a loop, because the screw is going to be coming in at an angle. You're not going to be able to go square on with the screw, so make a loop, and that way the wire can't get out from under it when it's at an angle.